Everybody. Very lively group this morning. I know that many of you are having an opportunity to see some old friends and colleagues you haven't seen in a while. There will be a break at on the program. You know what? I don't have the schedule for this morning. Oh, okay. So there will be a break at 11:15 to 11:30, and give you a chance to, also say hello to some people you haven't seen before. 20 years ago, when I came to the Free Library as president and director, we were one of the few large library systems with a computerized catalog and terminals in every branch. We were state of the art. It's been one of my goals to continue that, to make sure in the technology area, if not others, we are still state of the art. And I hope as the new director comes in January, the new president and director, that he or she will find right here a state-of-the-art library system. These president's forums or president's seminars were established some years ago to bring the entire staff together to hear about new ideas affecting libraries, affecting our communities, and to make sure that we all were aware of what's going on. And it was to affect not just the community that we call the free library community, but when I say community, I mean the communities in which you live. Your family, your friends, your children, grandchildren, nephews, nieces. The last forum was about 3 years ago when Moshe Safdie was here. He's the architect, you'll recall, for the Central Library Project. And some of the staff also participated in that. Some of the other presenters at these various president's forums or president's seminars were Joey Roger, who was at that time the president of the Urban Libraries Council, Susan Ellis, a national expert on the use of volunteers, and Michael Weiss, the author of Clustering of America. Today's session is prompted by the rapid and continuing change in technology, the changes that we're seeing in libraries and we're seeing all around us. It's changing our customers and what they come to us for, and how we deliver services and what the roles are that we're trying to fulfill. It is exciting and it is challenging. But I think it's a wonderful time to be in this library business. And I am as pleased as I can be that we have at this library a team, a staff like you, who sometimes are a little bit worried about what's happening and what the changes are and how you'll learn it. But, take to it and run with it. You are a remarkably flexible and positive, optimistic staff, and a staff that's willing to take on new challenges. I mentioned that in '87 we were state of the art. We had an automated catalog, terminal in every branch. But those of you who are here then will remember it was text only. No color, no pictures, no internet. I mean, it didn't exist except maybe with the Defense Department. But we had touch screens. Touch screens. God, we were way ahead of our time. Well, we had touch screens because it was the belief throughout everywhere, not just the library, that people will never learn how to type things in. They just won't do it. So the only way to get them to access the material that we had in the library was a touch screen. We had, when you turned the machine on, you had A to F E to L, M to S, etc., and you'd touch one line there, and then in the A to F, you'd get A, B, C, D, E, and F. And then you'd touch, let's say you were looking for, I don't know, F for Franklin, so it's in the F to L sequence. But you touch F, and then you get FA, FB, FC, FD, and you try to narrow it down. And maybe 10 or 15 hits later, you would get to it. Now, staff had a keyboard, but certainly not the public. We've come a long way since then. Of course, now many places, especially stores and everything, are getting back to touch screens, but a lot more sophisticated than what existed then. Just this last summer, we completed the installation of wireless in every single one of our libraries. We acquired and began to use on a quiet basis, there will be a bigger announcement later in the fall, the new domain name, freelibrary.org. We introduced, and I'm sure most of you have tried it, Aqua Browser. In a week or so, I forget the date, it will be our main catalog entry. And we've also made a lot of new electronic resources more available. For example, Dun & Bradstreet's $1 million database was only available at Central, and now it's available at every branch. And we're continuing to do that, when the technology of the company that we're buying it from allows, and when we can afford the additional cost. And also, as you know, we're working on downloading videos. You can begin to do that. There will be more and more. There will be streaming video. And as I said, there will be a big publicity campaign later in the fall. You'll be seeing the Free Library everywhere, bus wraps and other venues, billboards and other kinds of things. And we're working hard to keep pace. And once again, I want to thank all of you, because you make up the library. You are what people see. Oops, I think I got some of that from another presenter. I didn't mean to. But at any rate, our IT staff is working hard to keep pace, and you're working hard to keep pace. So what we're going to, we sent some people, a group of people, I forget how many, were able to go to the Mid-Atlantic Library Futures Conference in Atlantic City last spring, I believe it was. And at that conference, they were looking at what population changes were going on, new ways of using libraries, certainly the impact of technology and how we deliver services. And then about a month later, there was a conference the American Library Association sponsored on gaming. Downloads for gamers, online fiction games, how kids can create their own games, and even gaming for adults. And it examined how libraries are creating a presence for themselves in this virtual world. And we thought it would be a good idea to get some of these speakers to come here and talk with everybody. Everybody. And so I'm delighted to see this auditorium practically full. We had a full house yesterday morning and yesterday afternoon as well. These changes in technology have implications for all of us, in our work life, in our home life, and as I said before, with our children and grandchildren, and they are everywhere. And it certainly will have implications for the new Central Library as the planning for that continues. So we have two speakers for you this morning. The first is David Lankes. David is a professor at Syracuse University. You can see on the program more information about him. I've also learned that David, some of you know the ERIC Clearinghouse and the ERIC database. David, for some years, was the director of the ERIC Clearinghouse. So, without further ado, let me introduce to you David Lankes. David?
Good morning, good morning. I'm an academic from New York, so I usually don't need a microphone. Can everyone hear me all right? There you go. Good morning. We have work to do, you and I. We have great opportunities and great times ahead, but we have work to do. We exist at a really particular, interesting moment in history. As every moment ultimately has its challenges, we exist at a time when technology is changing the world, people are changing, the world in general is shifting around us. Now, this can cause anxiety and fear, but ultimately I like to look at it as creating huge opportunities. As Elliot mentioned, you are the library. When you talk about Philadelphia Free Library, you are the library. And so ultimately it's up to us to craft what it looks like. Now, some of us might have gotten into this profession, whether it's librarian, whether it's library assistant, whether it's maintenance, whether it's security, because of stability. Oh, I can't tell you the number of students that we have that come and say, I want to be a librarian. Why? I like books. Well, that's great. So why not go work at Barnes & Noble? Why not go work at an antique shop? Why not? Why a library? Well, I like books, and everyone knows the library is about books. We have books, right? One person once told me that we have an opportunity here and a challenge to make sure that we don't turn our libraries into book museums. I thought that was an interesting analogy. It's like, putting them behind cases of, and this is a fiction. I'm reading a book called The World Without Us. You might have heard of it. It's a really interesting premise. And the premise is, what if tomorrow, or actually even today, maybe quarter past noon, don't know, every human being on the planet disappeared? No, it doesn't matter why. They just did. Took a hike. I don't know. What would the world be like without us? It talks about things like those wonderful refineries on the way in from Philadelphia that probably wouldn't last too long. However, our plastic bags will last forever. The idea that once the nuclear meltdowns happen, it's okay because we all like five-legged frogs. Little things like that. But I'll ask you a question. Forget all of humanity because, it's all about us. My wife and I used to talk about having the universe hats. When you had it on, the world revolved around you. And we were very reluctant when our first child was born to give him the universe hat, but it happened. So, keeping the universe hat and all about us, what happened if the entire staff of the Free Library of Philadelphia disappeared tomorrow? Would it still be a library? Would it still be a library? The doors are open. We'll assume people are gentle and not destroying the whole place. But would it still be? Would your branch still be a library? Would this building still be a library if you didn't show up for work tomorrow? Why not? It's chaos? Okay. It's the interaction with the staff. Barbara Quinn once gave the analogy that a library after hours is like a coral reef without the fish. It may be pretty and it may have structure, but it's not alive. That ultimately, it's that interesting ecosystem that we create and the people in this room that make it a library. We've all walked past a room at some point in our life that had the word library on it, which was a closet full of books. And you're like, no. I got a bunch of books in my office. That's not a library. What makes a library? It's the people in this room. You are the library. Now, at one point, that's wonderfully refreshing. Great, I'm the library. But it's also a really interesting burden. You are the library. And I mean everyone, because we all know when people walk into the library, it has absolutely nothing to do with what your degree is that makes you a librarian. It's the fact that usually you stand behind a big desk that makes you a librarian. Whether that's security, whether that's a library assistant, whether that's someone who just accidentally fell behind the desk, it really doesn't matter. I mean, often, and it's really interesting because it affects the staff too. You found yourself doing really bizarre things because of this. Like, for example, you're visiting a foreign city and someone stops to ask you directions, and you try and give them directions. Has anyone ever had that? Yeah, it's a scary thing. Excuse me, where's Market Street? Market Street is that way. And then you catch yourself, you're like, what the hell am I doing? I don't know where Market Street is. It's this interesting philosophy that we take on. We have customer service ground into us so deeply that we want to serve even if we serve them poorly. Right? It's like the old adage about you can tell when a reference librarian has gone too far when the patron is running out the door and the reference librarian is following them with the article. One more thing! One more thing! It's people. Now, why is it people? Right? That's an easy thing to say. It's us. But it's not just us. It's what we do and how we approach things, right? I mean, it wouldn't... If you came in tomorrow and literally stood by the stacks and did nothing, besides being creepy, you know, when people would walk up to you and say, "Can you help me?" and you just went, that wouldn't be a library, right? It's not just the fact that we have, you know, warm bodies with books. I mean, that's an interesting, probably illegal in Georgia kind of idea, but, right? It's the fact that we have people that we can interact with. Now, I am a professor, and that means that I have been called an academic before, and rarely when I am called an academic is it a positive thing. Oh, who's that? Right? I mean, look at that poor word. The poor word. It's academic, meaning it's important. It's great. Thanks so much. I love it. Does anyone know where the phrase comes from? It's a quiz. Yeah, I know. You didn't think you were going to be tested this early in the morning. Anyone? Actually, Plato, but close, right? The Acadia, the academy, was a gym. It was an open-air gym in Athens where, like, these wonderfully aloof people would show up, you know, do calisthenics, and then stop and talk about, by the way, what's like. In essence, the academy is the YMCA of Greece. Right? And so being an academic, that means I go to the Y a lot. If you just sit around the steam room in our togas and go, "So, you're just wondering, why are we here?" I don't know, let's think about that, right? But what's also really interesting about that analogy is when the Greeks, who held philosophy and thinking, and when they held the most precious ideas, they did it in a playground. I mean, it's an interesting, when you look at Western civilization founded on the back of Greece, really Western civilization as done by the YMCA. I mean, it's a great idea that as we counter these ideas, we shouldn't forget that we need to play with these ideas. That these ideas come from the act of talking, conversing, playing, trying. That ultimately, what makes a library is the fact that we have academics. That we have people who want to engage in ideas. And they want to engage in them in the books, they want to engage them in DVDs, they want to engage them in lectures and seminars, they want to engage them in all aspects. And I want to be really clear. I think everyone should approach their work. I don't care if you're wondering about how to do circulation data or you're wondering how to secure the room after 5 o'clock. I don't care if you're worried. I was giving this talk yesterday and there was this beautiful carpet here. And I go, and every so often I go, whoop. And the head of buildings maintenance came up and said, "I'm going to get rid of that carpet because I don't want to kill you." Right? It's someone who sees something, thinks about it, and reacts to it. That needs to happen throughout because you are the library. When you do your tasks, it's not because necessarily someone told you or it should be. It should be because it makes sense to you, because you've thought about it, because you've analyzed it. And we're at a point in time when we have the opportunity to take it all and think about it again. If this were 1950, the idea of what a library is was pretty well ingrained. Oh, we have books. We're about books. It was the idea that in all libraries, the idea was to get them to the books. And not to give them an opinion, and not to give them a thought. If someone had a question, and you took them to a book, you couldn't actually open the book because you might be influencing where they would go in the book. Right? Head librarians were historians, because that's what libraries were. We're about history, dead things. The organization I want to work with. But we exist in an era of Google. We exist in an era of Amazon. We exist in an era that, frankly, a lot of people look at and go, "Oh my God, what's tomorrow?" Right? When we can get people like hormonally crazy about phones, right? This is the world we live in. But that's an interesting time because it puts on us the ability to reinvent anything. When no one has the answer, that means we can develop an answer. And our communities are looking to us just as much as we look to ourselves. Our communities are struggling in environments where what does it mean to have free municipal Wi-Fi? What does it mean to have all this technology available? What does it mean when I feel like I'm left behind? There's digital divide. What does it mean? We become an interesting agent of change where we can help our communities figure out the change, not just for ourselves, but for them as well. So, I'm going to talk about what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about what's happening in the virtual world and some ideas that are emerging in the virtual world, how those can impact libraries, but then I want to quickly transition that to what we can do in our physical spaces as well. Because I think that one of the greatest assets libraries bring are the fact that we're there. Presence. Right? Why is it that a library is better than Amazon? Well, sometimes it's because there's someone to talk to, as we said before. Sometimes it's because they know me. Sometimes it's because they look like me, they feel like me, they talk like me. They're me. And increasingly talking about ways that libraries can become more central within the community and more of the community. Now, here's the buzzword of the day. Web 2.0. Web 2.0 started out by someone trying to make some money off of a conference. He said, I want to have a conference. Let's call it Web 2.0. And as such, it went through thorough, rigorous testing of what the term means, which means we have no idea what it's like. Some people think it's the survivors of the .com era, when everything was like, sock puppets with dogs. That was our big business model, right? Well, something survived that idea. And new web darlings like Flickr and YouTube and such, it's based on lightweight technologies, and you're going to hear lots of buzzwords like XML and AJAX and JavaScript and HTTP and RSS and right? I don't want you to bog down in the terminology. The point is that Web 2.0 became a really interesting way, and then it became such an interesting idea that every other industry started thinking how they could be 2.0. There's a business 2.0. What's sad is the Business 2.0 magazine just closed. You'd think they could have figured out their own business model. Education 2.0. I mean, I'm sure there's like farming 2.0, and there is library 2.0. Right? I think personally, with a couple of thousand years of tradition, if we weren't the first profession, we were the second one. We were probably serving the first profession. Contraception. The idea here is that I think with a couple thousand years of history, when you include things like books, cataloging, we should be at least like 12.5. Library 12.5 data. We're library 2.0. But it's ultimately sits down, we have to be library 2.0, we have this 2.0, we have that 2.0. What does it mean? And what's interesting is it's hard to find a definition. In fact, this problem came up because the most deliberative, non-reactionary, solid intellectual force on earth known as the American Congress decided to take up this issue because when they looked around this was at the time when every magazine had MySpace on it and pedophilia somewhere within the article, right? Everyone knows the minute you put up a website, there are stalkers out there trying to get our children. And so what they said is we need to get rid of this in general, but clearly we can't do that, so we need to get rid of it in our schools, and because we're going to use the E-rate funding, we need to get rid of it in our libraries as well. But they couldn't just write a law saying no MySpace. So what they did was they wanted to write a more general rule. They came up with this piece of legislation called DOPA. Never a more aptly named piece of legislation out there. It should have been like Defense Against Congressmen at the time. DOPA was, we are going to tell you not only that you have to filter in schools and filter in libraries, but now we're going to tell you what you have to filter in your libraries and your schools. And they tried to come up with a definition. And they couldn't. I mean, they came up with the best they could get out was interactive website. Does that mean it has a form that someone can type in? Because guess what? Philadelphia Free Library, you're an interactive website. Let's filter you from yourself. Right? It could, but they said, don't worry. After we pass the legislation, we'll form a committee that will tell you what these actual sites are. Committee on American Activities or something like that. We all looked at that. We said, no, that's evil. That's bad. We left. But then we looked at libraries, and libraries were having the same problem. Right? Because the same things were in front of board members. The same things were in front of our staff, and we kept saying, wait a minute. Maybe there is something to blocking these kinds of sites. Let's come up with a policy, and what's next? And so they really couldn't figure out a good definition for this ambiguous term, this ambiguous idea. And so the American Library Association and Syracuse University entered into a project to figure out what's going on in this whole 2.0 world of social network. And we started doing the buzzword stuff. Oh, it's a mashup. Oh, it's a this. Oh, it's a that. It was a really unsatisfactory term. What we wanted to do is find something durable. Something underlying this that made sense. Something underlying that we could either form policy for, against, systems. And what we ended up with was this concept called participatory librarianship. And it goes something like this. If we think about those Greeks in the YMCA of history, what were they doing? We're talking. And in fact, the Socratic method is the idea that you sit and you talk and you argue your way to the truth. Well, there's a fellow in England by the name of Gordon Pask who set out to teach machines to think. And he started by figuring out how people thought. And what he found through all this research and theory, and it's a book this slide that if you ever need to go to sleep, just read the first 10 pages, was something called conversation theory. And he says, knowledge is created through conversation. When you want to learn something, the way you do it is you talk. Now, sometimes you talk to other people. Sometimes you talk to yourself. Sometimes you're the only one in the room who can keep up. Anyone feel that much?
Yes.
Yes, there you go. Right? And we try not to have people look at us and be, oh my God, this sounds like something. But, we do that in school. We call that metacognition or critical thinking. If I go to work and I take the left way, I get the good bagels. If I take the right way, I get there faster. Which way? And that's the idea of the internal dialogue. So we create knowledge through conversation. But this is a really interesting way of looking. We said not only looking at Web 2.0, but if you look at librarianship in general, if libraries are in the knowledge business, they're also in the conversation business. That books, videos, web pages, all this stuff is simply artifacts. That all those massive collections out there are simply a pale ember and the byproduct of the really cool process we call knowledge creation. Now there's utility in it. They help these other new dialogues. They help conversation. But wouldn't it be interesting if we looked at the actual knowledge creation of the process themselves? When people walk into our libraries and they have questions, they want to talk. They want to have a conversation. Sometimes that conversation is with themselves in front of books and materials. Sometimes it's with the reference staff. Sometimes it's with the security staff. Sometimes it's with their friends. Sometimes with a teacher or mentor. They want to talk. And this idea of a library is exactly counter to what we're trying to do. The idea that we build catalogs and systems that erase noise is exactly counter to what we want to do. That why is a library not a library without the people? Because only people can have conversations. That's what makes a library, is the community's conversations that we can be part of, that we can have. The materials, the book budgets, the things, they're great, they're important, but they're secondary to the primary activity. You're in the learning business. You may not feel like a teacher, but you are. And we all have stories of where conversations have touched individuals. We all have the stories that make us feel good when we go home at the end of the day and say, I helped that person. Maybe it was finding them the right book, but when you did that, it started with a conversation about what is the right book. Maybe it was finding them a social service. Maybe it was finding them a business resource. Maybe it was finding them a website, but it started with a talk. Think back to your story, the story that makes you feel good about what you do, and my guess is you'll find somewhere in there a conversation where you touch someone's life. So why is it that when we look at our enterprises and organizations, we focus up here instead of up there? This pressure for learning, this need for people to understand, leads to a pressure for participation. You see it all over the internet, you see it all over media. When people want to learn, they need to be active constructors of their own knowledge. They want to be part of it. And this is why I hate. Librarians are the best search engine. No, you're not. You suck at search engines. You try and throw 300,000 irrelevant items at someone in 0.5 microseconds, you'll lose that game. You're not a search engine. You're not just about finding stuff. You're about making sense. I had this ongoing argument with my former advisor. We like to have these arguments. I don't know if we like to, but we do have these arguments. And he said, we're in a project of credibility. He said, oh, wouldn't this be awesome? Have librarians and library staff pick the best resources on the web. Oh, that would be cool. It would create the best, most credible search engine ever. And I said, no, it wouldn't. I said, librarians, what makes them special? What makes librarians special to pick the best web resource? I'll tell you right now, librarians, library assistants, grounds crew, maintenance, IT folks, you all are equal at picking good sites. What makes librarians and the library profession and the library organization special? You can pick the best sites for a purpose, for a person. That's what makes that profession special. It's not that you have some God-given talent and knowledge. It's that you have this service mentality where you want to know what their problem is. The Ku Klux Klan website is probably a really great, wonderful, perfect resource for a reporter working on hate sites on the web. One of the best. For an 8th grader looking for after-school activities, not a good idea. So the idea that you can pick a great website, it's all context. And where does that context come from? Conversation. And how does that happen? People participate. And it's led to this need, this obligation from people walking in, requiring themselves to be constructors of the knowledge. You see it in the web. Don't just tell me what book is good. I want to tell you what I thought of that book. Don't just give me a bunch of images. I want to upload images. Don't just send me video. I want to upload my video. Don't just let me sit passively and watch media. I want to construct my stories in my games and in my recreation as well. This obligation, this pressure to participate is at our doorstep. And what do we give? How do we respond to this pressure? This is the Onondaga County Public Library. It's my library. I was on the board, so I'm partially to blame for the following demo. I'm sure it looks absolutely nothing like the Free Library of Philadelphia, so I'm sure this is going to be completely irrelevant to you, but let's take a moment. First of all, when someone comes to the website, and we know what makes a library? People. What do we see on our website? Oh, okay. Not a face to be seen. By the way, if you're worried, you're like, why don't you put people in librarian space? Oh, no, I don't want to be able to hire a model. It's fine. And Julia Roberts as your librarian. I don't care. It's people. And I'll tell you what, if it's not this, my guess is it's a picture of your building. Because there's nothing someone needs more when they go to a website than what your physical location looks like. Right? So, I need information. I have a question. I want to learn. Where do I go? Well, clearly, I go to the thing where I order sweaters for Christmas. All right. So, I end up with something like this. And now I get to search either the sweater place or digital catalog, which I assume are virtual sweaters. But I'm going to go ahead and go to the right one, the catalog. And I get this. And it's Aqua Browser, so clearly it's easier to understand. Aqua Browser has some great features. And I'm going to enter a search. And I'm going to search for Harry Potter because that's what I want to search for. On the web, I'd search for Britney Spears, but not anymore. Not with my children present, at least. And so the first item I get, of course, is the Magic of Harry Potter video cassette. All right. Well, the second one, Lego Creator. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, and then I keep going, and if I go to the second page, I'm going to find the book I want. Now I gave it a slightly ambiguous query. By the way, why? Well, catalog, you know, the catalog producers are great. The idea of a last in, first out, the last thing we index is what shows up first in the list, makes sense. Okay. So I'm going to go down, and I'm going to find, here's the Sorcerer's Stone. That's the one I wanted. Now, before you yell at me, yes, I could have searched for Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone and probably gotten that first, but stick with me. And here it is, how warm and fuzzy. This is exactly the resource I wanted. If I scroll down, I see where those books are. Perfect, lovely, great. Let's look at another way to find information. You don't have to admit this, but I am. How many people, when they're going to find a book in their library, start at Amazon, and then get the ISBN number and go to your catalog? Why? Well, let's look at it. I'm going to do the same search, Harry Potter. And I'm going to, the great thing is the first result I get is, at the time I did this search, a book that didn't even exist yet, but that was cool. I think if we can provide people with books that have not yet been published yet, we can corner the market. And I'm going to scroll down on the same list, and I'm going to find the Sorcerer's Stone. There it is. I'm going to bring it up, and here we go. Now, how many people, whether it's at the library, maybe it's a community organization you work for, whatever it is, have had a conversation about how we need to improve the website? A couple, this website sucks. Often the hard criticism. And then it quickly turns, particularly in library land, to it needs to be more like Amazon. It needs to be more like Google. It needs to be more like this. And that quickly devolves into it needs to be simpler and easier. Less stuff on the page, less confusing materials, right? That's why we don't show Mark anymore. Right? I want you to see something. This is the entire bibliographic record, the entire screen presented to you by WorldCat, which is a big index of all the books carried by most of the libraries. Here's the exact same record at Onondaga County Public Library. With me so far? You can read that third line? No. It's an eye test. National Library of Australia. Here's what the Library of Congress has, right? So this is every bit of data these organizations have on this item. Ready? Let's see what Amazon does. It's shorter, simpler, easier interface. What's going on? That's not shorter. That's not simpler. Why is it that something that has more data, more information thrown at a user is somehow easier to find things than catalogs that are shorter and simpler? What's going on here? The short answer is, this is an inventory system. This is a conversation system. This is a participatory system. What do I mean by participatory? Well, clearly it's all just advertising and corporate gunk. That's the corporate advertising at the top. Says, welcome to Amazon. The next block, that's the sales information. Really, it's bibliographic information. The ISBN number, the author, the illustrator. The next one are recommendations. If you like this, you'll also like that. And then, quality reviews. New York Times Book Review, Book Journal, all these sort of nice, high prestige reviews of the book. This is the additional bibliographic data, which if you add that sort of orange box and the light blue box, you're over here. So what's the rest of this page? Recommendations based on purchases and tags. If you like this one, people who bought this book also bought that book. What's this stuff? Open reviews. People who bought this book coming back and telling you what they thought of the book. When they came to Amazon and they said, I don't want you to just tell me what people thought of the book, I want to tell you what I thought of the book. And not only that, but I get recognized for doing it. What is this? Conversation. What are people finding when they come to libraries are one-way conversation. This is what we know about this book. What are they finding when they go to Amazon? Here's a chance to talk among your peers and among yourself and have a conversation about this, to participate in this. Pathfinders! Remember when we used to do Pathfinders? It's like standing dissemination of information. SDI, we used to do that really well. Then we said, oh, it's too much work. And then Amazon makes tons of money doing it. All right, then we have discussion tools, wikis, blogs, tagging. And then finally at the end, we have other marketing data. Conversation, discussion, finding, participation, inventory. What do I mean by an inventory system? An inventory system is when you walk into the store and you ask if you have a shoe in a size 9, and the salesperson walks away from you, behind a desk, hiding, finding, and they come back and say, yes, we do in our whatever branch or whatever store or whatever. They don't want to let the user see the interface. It's so ugly. Doesn't make sense to a user who's shopping shoes that they have to look at inventory data and stock numbers. And what do? You're looking for a book? Here you go. We turn it around and say, this is our primary interface. We have opportunities here, folks. Right? We have opportunities. Now, we've got to be careful with our opportunities, because opportunities can also turn into problems in and of themselves. This is a list of predominant systems in libraries. We have our catalog, we have our databases, we have our virtual reference and traditional reference systems, we have our digital collections that we go and scan, we have all this. This list probably doesn't look very different than the OCPL front page. Because every time libraries see opportunities to serve, we see an opportunity for a new system. And every time we see an opportunity for a new system, we build one and plop it on top of the other one. And I'll tell you, one of the things that really scares me in the Library 2.0 language, while I like a lot of it, one thing that scares me is the idea that if you throw a blog at it, it will get better. Right? A blog is just this idea of a website where you put in these sequential journal entries. It's kind of like your diary online. Right? Wiki, the idea of collaborative editing. All these wonderful tools and functions. Let's put a wiki up there. Let's put a blog up there. A librarian blogging about librarianship will bring not one more user into your library. A librarian blogging about what good books to read, what's happening in the community. A librarian is providing value and service to the community. That might. But the worst thing we can do is slap it on top. Let's throw a wiki on there. Let's throw this on there. Because what happens is we've never stopped to say, what's the difference between a database and a catalog? Well, this is books we own and these are books we don't. That doesn't make sense to a user. Well, this is where I order sweaters and this is where I keep my addresses, right? These terms don't even make sense to the user. Now, the library world, we've begun to understand and address this. And so what you're seeing is a first level integration. When I search, I should be able to search the books, the databases, all of this stuff at the same time. We call that federated searching. It's the one search box, which you have on the homepage of Philadelphia Library. Right? And we see this also with digital repositories and virtual reference, but this is a trend. And eventually what's going to happen is we're going to have a system that's sort of our enhanced catalog. This is where you go to search to find books or articles or things with recommenders and conversation, our sort of metadata world. And this is going to be where the content is. So we host blogs for communities and community members. But this is a trajectory. What we're seeing is has leading to what I call a participatory library, a system that is about integrating information. So Philadelphia, as many communities do, has everyone read the same book, right? The book, and I understand it hasn't been announced yet, right? We're all on pins and needles for what book we're about to read. But let's just say that it's the Danielle Steele, all right? Wouldn't that be great? It's like the library just gives up and says, screw culture, everyone's going to read this one. You know? October 78 Playboy, we're all going to read it. You know? So you walk into, so everyone comes online to your library and says, I need the Danielle Steele book. So what do? They go here to find out if you've got the book, and they get put on hold for like 3.5 years. By the time everyone's off to reading the 78 Playboy, they're getting their book, right? But what happens if they want to hear other reviews or comments or critical analysis of Danielle Steele? They go to here, right? What if they want to find good websites? Well, they might go here, they might go up there, and navigating this is nuts, right? And as librarians, we're like excellent contortionists. Well, if you want the book, it's over there. If you want the articles, it's over there. If you want the blog, it's over there. Right? This is what we look like to our public. I just want you to know that. Why not, when they walk in and they put in Danielle Steele, doesn't say, here's the book, here's a review. By the way, there's a book group meeting next week. Would you like to go there? By the way, there's an online discussion about Chapter 8. Would you like to join it? By the way, this is what other people thought about it. All in the same place. All in the same system. Right? So that and not only that, but if you have a critique or analysis, a picture, an image, something, upload it here. Click. That your community can contribute to this just as much as libraries. Libraries have an extraordinarily naive view of identity. There are two types of people that exist inside a library building. There are librarians, and there are not librarians. Any of you who are in the library assistant game, maintenance game, security game, they have already noticed this. Somehow they neglected to give you the key to the club. What is the difference between these two? Librarians can manipulate and add materials to systems. They have authorship. Everyone else, including the patrons, do not. This is wrong. Right? Imagine, I understand that this stage has been used by much more interesting people than me, such as a Nobel laureate, or better yet, Michael Palin, right? Was here, sold out the place. Thank God for Michael Palin, right? So Michael Palin knows a thing or two about comedy, knows a thing or two about travel, right? If Michael Palin walks in and says, oh, you really need this book, oh, you really need to point to this article, what do? Let me have you talk to a librarian, because they know how to do that, or they are allowed to do that. Let Michael Palin upload the book. Let him add the material, let him add the data. The idea that the community is somehow unable to handle the responsibility of authorship and contributions is condescending at best. That what we have is a paternalistic relationship with a community where we're going to help them, whether they want it or not. You will. Libraries have as one of their core missions literacy. Where does that come from? Well, it comes from farther back, but if we look at Melville Dewey, in the late 1800s, came and said, we must educate the unwashed masses. So when he talked about literacy and the idea of the public library being a co-equal institution to an educational institution, what he meant was we need to go fix that. It wasn't don't give them Danielle Steele. Oh my God. We give them the right books to read. I don't think anyone necessarily, well, that's not true. I think a lot of us want to do that, but I think we wouldn't say it out loud anymore. This idea that somehow the community needs to be fixed separates us from the community, separates us and alienates us from the community when we need to be part of it. We need to have an ongoing conversation and contribution with the community saying, what do you need? What do you need? What do you need? Right? And we need to be less book item focused. So here's just a quick example of what I mean. This is our library, Syracuse University Library. I pick on myself with all these examples. You think I do better. And we have this place where we do something called reserves. Reserves are if you go to college and you're in a class, the professor can set aside readings and say, you got to read this stuff in the class. The library will scan it in these days, go to the website, and you can get a digital copy. Cool. So how does it work? Well, you go to find a reserve. You tell them what instructor you have, what department you're taking, what course, and it spits back everything that has to do with that course. Now, what's interesting is, what do all of these materials have in common? Well, they might be part of this instructor. But why? Why did this instructor pick it? We actually know why the instructor picked these because we take the class. Or we have a syllabus that breaks it through. But the library strips all of that connective tissue out and says, here's a bunch of stuff. So we took on the idea of reimagining this. What would it look like if we built a conversation, a participatory system around this idea? And this was our first draft. And our first draft says, oh, this is easy. What you got is you got your articles, you got your books, you got your classes, you got your feeds, you got your stuff. You got to have friends, because it's Web 2.0 and everyone's got friends in Web 2.0. I mean, I'm pathetic. I'm on MySpace, I got like one friend. I don't even know him. And then, oh, this is really cool. We love this. This is warm and fuzzy. Because what we've done is mashups and we've done all this stuff. So we have the article, we have the bibliographic data, you can talk to a librarian, you've got to have a tag cloud, everyone's got to have a tag cloud. I actually like tag clouds, but we'll get there in a second. And then we've got the Amazon data. So this is clearly a better system. But we asked ourselves, what is the center point of this system? What is it that we're talking about? We're talking about a thing. If libraries are about participation, they're about learning, they're about conversation, they're about people, what we've done is we've built a fancy, feature-rich thing around things. This is all about that PDF article. This whole system is to glorify a PDF article. That's what I want to be in the business of, glorifying PDF. And so we said, let's rethink this, and let's think about this from a person perspective, and we came up with this. So now what you do is you have your conversations. When someone walks into your library, you are a small part of an ongoing conversation. Maybe someone's taking a class in this example. Maybe someone's writing a novel. Maybe someone's trying to get their tax information filed. Maybe someone's trying to enrich their life through gardening. Maybe someone's trying to prevent violence in their neighborhood. There's a great conversation going on, which you are a part, an important part, and I want to be a more important part. But the first thing is to acknowledge that they have a conversation that started before they walked in your door. And if you're stuck inside your doors, you may not even know what that conversation is. So we're going to start with this conversation around a class. There's the syllabus. That syllabus might have an assignment. The assignment might, oh, I found this image. That image led me to talk to the photographer, and now I have this. And so what you're doing is you're putting connective tissue back in the items. These individual nodes, these things, these books, are only useful if you know how they're connected and how they're put together. Imagine if I asked you to come up with a reading list. So it's the Danielle Steele reading list. And all you did was put titles. And I came back 2 years and I brought you a reading list and I said, why are these things together? How likely would you be to reconstruct your thinking at that time? We know this for a long time. That's why libraries create things called annotated bibliographies. It explains how these resources fit together and what they're about. That's what this system does. It doesn't just capture the things, it captures how the things are related. And once you pull up one of those things, then this stuff makes sense, but you still know why you're bothering to look at it. What you begin to do is move to a conversational system. Imagine now that you're in your library, Free Library in Philadelphia, you have a book. You've added that book to your collection. Now you can say, I read this book because it was part of my thinking on topic X. Now you can see who else read that book. Who else put comments in about that book? Well, it's interesting. Here's someone who used that book, but they were having conversation why. I hadn't thought about that. Now I can see what other books they've read. This idea that you begin to move through these things, not based on the book per se, but how those books are used and connected, and suddenly it becomes a social resource. Suddenly the reason we're providing out materials are to enrich a social activity and not simply to say we circulated them. This leads to a different approach. In the old model of librarianship, it was very passive. It was the idea that the library is a separate process and collection from the core community business. The emphasis of the document, we waited. Our job was to make sure that our buildings were open, that our desks were neat, and that we had a smiling face when people walked in. And we waited. And we waited. This is a passive thing. What happens is, and when someone came in with their question, we were ready. Boom! Great question. Let me give you 3,000 resources. Here they go. Here. We were ready. And we felt satisfied. And we walked away saying, job well done. And we did help. But how do we know? When you evaluate someone, you need to evaluate them 10 days after they ask the question to find out if they can actually use the information. When you need to find out if you did a good job, you need to go into their homes to find out if you changed their lives, not did they walk out smiling. In the new model, in this participatory model, this engaged model, the library is an active and engaged agent of the community, not a service for the community, an agent of the community. When the community has a problem, the library has a problem. When the community needs to develop a solution, the library helps develop that solution. Maybe it's economic development. Maybe it's youth violence. Maybe it's literacy in the schools. Maybe it's enrichment and beautification. Maybe it's architectural design. Maybe it's what it is. What is your community talking about, and what have you done to match that community need? Not just everyone reads the same book. Everyone's talking about the same thing. Are we part of that? Right? What I loved when I heard about that everyone reads the same book was it led to conversations on immigration, and it led to fabulous conversations. That's the sign of success, not how many people read the book. What came out of that? What was the conversation? We become a community repository. We become a publisher of the community. Does your collection look like your community, or does your collection look like what someone feels your community needs? Right? This idea, the emphasis on documents, that we used to wait for people to have questions, and we used to go get anything the community didn't have. What that means is you've built buildings full of stuff that your community didn't have and may not need again. You've built things that are other than the community. What about musicians in your community? Do you podcast their work out to people? What about authors and poets in the community? Do you publish and put those materials online and make them searchable? What about the conversations the community is having? What about events where you have meeting spaces? Do you record them and make them available so that when people have this conversation or something later, it's available? This is the idea of becoming a community publisher as well as providing the information they need. The library as force of progress for the community. This is an uncomfortable position for some people. Many people will look at the library as a service, that we sit back and we wait, and the community asks us, we're there. As opposed to a force that helps push the community forward. When someone's having a conversation about youth violence, the library should show up at that meeting and say, I found a bunch of resources that I think might help. And by the way, come have the meeting next time in my library, and I'll videotape it, and we'll rebroadcast it for anyone else having a youth violence conversation around the city. Or did you know that there's a conversation happening in Syracuse about youth violence? We're going to stream that into the library on Thursday night. If you can't see it, we'll record it and post it and publish it on the web. That's conversation. It's about things, but the things are tied to what the community needs. The mission of the library needs to be not we collect and disseminate. We facilitate knowledge creation of the community through conversation. We are facilitating. And I don't, once again, how our buildings look, what's staffed at the reference desk, what materials are in there, every part of the library operation, the business, should be around facilitation. How do we talk about facilitating? Well, one, we provide access. We provide meeting rooms. Why do we provide meeting rooms if we're in the thing business? Meeting rooms have nothing to do with things, and yet we do it because inherently we understand that we are a community operation, and communities are about people coming together and talking, not about people coming and putting their nose in a book. That may help it, but ultimately it's for action. We provide sufficient bandwidth. Free Wi-Fi in every branch of the library is an amazing contribution. This is a digital divide issue. You don't have it at home, we can provide it. Because if you need to be part of the conversation, we'll get you there. We collect those unique resources. But once you have access, you got to know how to use it. The idea, we know this for a long time. When the digital divide issue was front and center, we put computers and public access machines in our buildings. And good for us. And within seconds, we realized that someone sitting in front of a computer is not the same as someone using a computer. They sit down and go, what the hell? What's this mouse thing, right? It's the famous thing about using coffee on the CD board. The idea we had to teach them. We had to do tutorials. We had to do mentorship. We need to train them. We had issues of language come up yesterday. When the conversation isn't in English, or is in English and it's not the native language, how can we support it? Well, we can't have someone on staff that speaks every language. No, but you have other people in the community you can call upon. Do you have a referral index based on language? Is that an issue in your community? In the environment, we provide free and open access and safety. And safety not just from bring your kids in and we'll make sure they don't, no one walks away with them. That's one and final and important function. But the other is, if you want to be part of a conversation, no one's going to be looking over your shoulder as to what that conversation is. If you want to have a discussion about radical thoughts and all this other stuff, you should feel safe to have that conversation here. And motivation. How do we recognize people for doing it? What we need to do is shift our thoughts of the library as a collection of collections. We got this stuff, we got that stuff, we got this stuff, but we put it all in a big room. To the idea of the library as a collection of users. Think of your library as a collection of your community. Everyone who walks into your building is an item in your collection. Everyone who walks into that building is an item. And they may have and use resources from the library assets. And they may have used web stuff. And they may upload their own photos and their own pictures and their own materials. And Eli's going to show you some brilliant stuff in this. And that's okay. What if a local community group says, we got together and we had 500 cookbooks. And you say, you know what? You have a place to put them? Well, no. Here's a shelf. Well, then we have to catalog it. No, here's a shelf. Your job as a community to organize it, but we know as a community need, this is something the community cares about, we will provide you with space. We will provide you with help. And so you look at this idea, providing hybrid meeting rooms where you can stream information in and out, providing language groups, providing daycare, providing other motivation where you recognize it. Ultimately, we need to capture the conversation while respecting privacy but creating a truly hybrid environment. And staff need to be, we had a great phrase, a motto you might want to think about. We're busy inventing the future, come join us. Right now, all too often we say staff training is an afterthought for a second. I think you guys do pretty well at it. But what about if every time blogging is new and big? Let's put on a session. Let's let the patrons and the librarians and the security staff, everyone sit in that same meeting because we all need to know it together. We need to be a continuous learning organization. My last message, and I'm gone too far anyway, I'll just skip to this one. We did a report on virtual reference, and our initial literature review we titled Fear and Loathing in Library Language. And it was at the time, it was about 4 years ago. And almost every article was how Google was going to put us out of business. Or how Amazon was going to put us out of business. Or just about anything was going to put us out of business. And in great times of great turmoil and great change, there's great anxiety. And as I said before, instead of thinking about fear and loathing, instead of wondering what's coming next, and oh my God, what's the next gadget, or the next file format, or the next three-letter acronym we need to worry about, what I encourage you to do is turn that around to the obligation of leadership. The obligation to lead. If you are the library, if you are the sum total of the library, if you are the agent of your community, if you are the R&D organization and the information repository of your community, you have an obligation to lead. An obligation that when that three-letter acronym comes along, you not only know it, but you help shape it. That when a community conversation comes up, you are there and present. That when the community can't make it into your building, you go out of the building. You have a great opportunity before you. We all do, which is no one can define to the nth degree what a library is anymore. That's the dirty little secret. No one in the world can give you one concrete, universally agreed upon definition of a library. What a wonderful world to live in. That may seem scary, but to me that's great, because what that means is this community, you in concert with everyone in the organization, in concert with the community, have the chance to draft that for your community. What is a library in Philadelphia? That's the answer we need to get. And in order to do that, we must first change. Change is like heaven. Everyone thinks it's a good idea. No one wants to go first. But ultimately, it's time to take that leap, to innovate, to build your playground, to build the new Greek YMCA, where we can come together, regardless of rank, position, degree, term, anything, and say, what is it this community needs today? That we can participate and shape this community, that we can make this the best library ever. And thank God we work in a library. And thank God this library is here, because ultimately this is the opportunity we have to shape and engage and participate and become part of the community. I welcome you to that challenge. Thank you very much.
David is pleased to answer some questions. We do have time for questions. We also have microphones which we can move. We can move these microphones out a little further so you can get to them. But above all, we want to make sure everybody can hear. If you don't want to use the microphone, make sure everybody in the front and in the back can hear. Okay, right here.
2 questions.
Can you hear in the back?
Can you make the presentations available to us?
Yes, I'm sorry. That if you go, I apologize. Let me. Come on, computer. Yes. There. DavidLankes.org. I'll have that. I'll have pointers to Eli, and Eli's going to make his available as well.
One other quick question.
Yeah.
When you were talking, I was thinking about how library pages tend to be very linear, and what you're describing reminds me of ThinkMap, of clustering search engines where information is all associative, so that when you have a topic like Harry Potter, you could have a constellation of different nodes, book discussions, criticism, who knows what. And it would be changing the model from linear to an associative model, and I'm wondering if you can speak to that.
Thinking threads, absolutely.
Okay.
I can do it with an example.
Okay.
The example I have, one of my favorite historian, publishers, broadcasters, is a fellow by the name of James Burke, did a series called The Day the Universe Changed to Connections. And he had a really great example of how this associative model works versus a linear model. And he said, the North winning the Civil War led to the computer revolution. And there's our thesis. Everyone with me. So I'm going to do it for you. I think I've got it down to about 30 seconds, right? Common wisdom in military at the time of the Civil War was that the more manpower you provide in the field, the more victory you would have. The South had more men than the North, so therefore they should have won the war. However, in the division, the North had greater industrial capacity, and they could therefore generate more artillery. The problem with artillery is you don't shoot in a straight line. The North could bring more artillery, but the problem is that when you say someone's 45 feet, you can't just point and go boom. You have to shoot at an angle, and it goes in a ballistic trajectory. To figure out that trajectory, you have to figure out the area under an arc, which is done through calculus. Not too many northern soldiers could do calculus on the fly in the field, and so what they used to do is when they produce a cannon, they would put together a room full of mathematicians called computers who would calculate, given this distance, fire at this angle. as war progressed, this became the common ideal, which is war artillery led to more victory. And so during World War I and World War II, there was a greater production and emphasis on new artillery and new sizes and greater capacity. So much so that in World War II, they ran out of the people to actually calculate those tables. They needed an automated way to do it. And so therefore, they looked at vacuum tubes to create the first binary computer that could calculate these tables automatically. The problem was they were built with vacuum tubes that were very fragile. And so as insects and things would go through them, they would burst. They had to find a better replacement for vacuum tubes. They figured out if you wafer two pieces of silicon, you get something called a semiconductor, and they could shrink them. This led to the transistor. As transistors got shrunken over and over and over in time, you soon were able to have thousands and millions and hundreds of millions on top of these things, which is what's in the core of your computer today called the CPU. So therefore, the North, winning the Civil War. Well, you'll find it in his book, but that's not a linear relationship between this, therefore cause this, therefore cause this. What you're doing is you're surfing between facts and ideas that someone put together as an argument in an associative model. And what the problem is, I'll give you a really specific example where libraries tend to fail. If you have a series, a 5-book series, and you put it into a catalog, can you find every book in the right order from the catalog entry of one of the books? You've lost the connective tissue that was intended with the author originally. Simple things like that allow you to build relationships and conversations and not simply focus on a given idea.
Yeah, another question. I saw somebody with their hand up in the back, but I don't see them now. Oh, okay, Dan, right up front here.
But it sounds like you're talking about, in some ways, by going out to the community, the sort of a democratic impulse in the library. I'm wondering how you reconcile, libraries have to make choices about shelving space and what resources they have to spend. How do you reconcile democratizing the library with being inclusive of the person who's in the minority, and not maybe that one person who has some different need from what the community generally says and may not be, high on the list in terms of choice making?
Fabulous question. What was understood, there was an interesting political science examination discussion between democracy and a liberal democracy. Saddam Hussein was elected by a democratic vote. I don't think anyone would say it's exactly how we would equate democracy, but tyrants tend to get 100% votes, right? And a liberal democracy is one that understands that mob rule is different than democracy, that you need to build in safeguards, particularly for the minority voice. So one answer to that is we need to have these conversations with the community, and we need to be agents that have an equal voice in the community. Right now, libraries have a huge amount of credibility and reputation that we don't exploit. So when you go to the community and they say, these are the conversations we need to capture, the libraries need to stand up and say, well, wait a minute, what about these, and making sure we capture these voices? And we need to use that reputation, that power, because in a conversation you have two equal parts, right? Not one overwhelms the other. Right now, I think libraries are very much about, we have our perspective and we'll let you have this a little bit. The other order is, we want, can I steal I'm going to anyway, sorry. A comment about the library would be better if you please gave us pornography and pie. Prostitutes and pie, right? I'm not quite sure we want to be the prostitutes and pie place, so there's somewhere, there's somewhere in between where we need to have that conversation. That's one aspect. The other aspect is in looking at technology, because technology has changed. What I want you to do is I want you to think about capturing conversations from two sources. The first source is you're walking through a train station at rush hour, and you're trying to capture the conversation. It's all noise. And so what you want to do is stand up and say, everyone having a business conversation on this side of the room, everyone having a personal on this one. All right, the business folks, lawyers over here, and you begin breaking them down until they're small enough chunks that you can understand them. Right? This is traditional classification, libraryship. This is why we have the fiction area and the medical area and things like that. Now I want you to think about another way in which you engage in these kind of conversations all the time, called the radio. Right now, as we speak, about 50 to a couple thousand radio signals are pulsing through our bodies with cell phones and radio and all these things, but they're not interrupting our conversation. But if you have a given tool, you can tune into them. So in your car, if you want, you can use the radio to tune into the conversation you want. Not canceling out the other conversation, not eliminating them, not segmenting them. If they're still there, you're just paying attention to one or the other. And you can even co-locate them differently than how it is normally. So 102.5 and 93.2, I can put them right next to each other on my little presets. So you're reorganizing the world. And my presets and your presets may be radically different, but we haven't had to change all of these radio signals. We've used technology to allow people to filter and select, as opposed to us forcing these voices. So somewhere in technology, the resource constraints begin to decrease in certain technologies. Giving shelf space is expensive. Giving web space, not so much. Creating a new area of the library, expensive. Creating a new area of the website, not so much. So where is it that we can actually allow all these voices to occur, and an obligation upon us to provide the tuning tools so that people don't get lost in the noise? I think libraries, our catalogs, our physical spaces, our websites need to be noisy places. They need to be loud and noisy and raucous places. Give them a room for the silent study. But ultimately, this idea that our catalogs can't keep all this comment data because it'll overwhelm us, give them good filters. So I don't want to see this person's view. I only want to see the library's view, or this view, or that view, or this view. Great question.
Okay, we have time for one more questions, or two if the answer is short. Sorry. Okay, any other questions? Okay, right here, well, why don't you stand up? Just talk real loud.
I'm just, how does a large urban library system get to that? That's the thing in our underserved communities. Should our larger Ys be in the underserved communities? How do we engage them in this conversation when sometimes they don't want to talk?
Yeah, this will be a quick answer. So, the short answer to that is we need to engage our communities so that the communities determine what is the priority. So when you talk about the underserved, that word, underserved, is a community-defined term, right? In some settings, that might be ethnically defined. In some, it might be age-defined. I mean, Eli's going to get up and really, to me, talk about an underserved community called teenage boys by libraries, right? And so the community needs to have an ongoing dialogue where we say this. Now, your point about communities who don't want to talk is much more interesting to me. Because one, we have a history, I'm at a university, and our university has a history of more or less imposing itself on communities of need. And what we did in our west side of downtown, there's some of the poorest city ever, right? Syracuse is not Philadelphia, but it's really kind of frightening, the statistics. And that community finally said, stop sending your social workers and stop sending your psychologists down to fix us. We're tired of that. What you need to do is figure out, listen to us, and we'll tell you to send down, and you know the people they asked for? They asked for the technologists to give them Wi-Fi. They asked for the geographers to map out problem areas so they could better define the city hall where they needed brown site cleanups and things. That's what I mean by engaging in conversation. A lot of times people don't want to talk because we are not perceived as listening. So I don't have an easy answer for it other than to say we need to respect that community and show and demonstrate to be in that community much more than in our buildings in that community.
Folks, we need to stop now. Got a 15-minute break. See you back here at 11:30. You knew you were on recording. You were
That's right. You got it. I just need the stress.
No. You know, it's good. It was good. I think also, you know, you did it twice yesterday.
Right.
You saw how things went. Last night was a great.
Exactly. Yep, you got it.
Nice job.
That's right.
Nice job.
Yeah, I won't. Yeah, I almost forgot some other stuff here. I won't.